Today, we're going to talk about vertebrate pests. And vertebrate pests are something that we have to handle quite often. It's one of the four majors: vertebrae, stinging insects, ants, and spiders. Vertebrates are an animal or a large group of animals distinguished by the possession of a backbone or spinal column. That's the thing that you learned about in probably grade school. And they include mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fishes. They're considered chordates. Vertebrae have the same common features: notochord, a dorsal hollow nerve cord, spinal column, pharyngeal slits, so an area where you breathe and up here in your throat, and a tail. Now your question might be, we're vertebrates, we don't have a tail. As you're developing in the womb until about 6-7 months, you actually do have a tail. And if you look at pictures of babies before they're born, when they're 5-6 months, you can actually see the tail. Vertebrates are further differentiated from other chordates by this vertebrae that the spinal column actually goes into. And that forms a protective barrier for the spinal cord. And it's bendable, pliable, and because of this, it has to have a way of protecting the bones, and that's where the discs come in. And we, or vertebrates, are the only ones that have a brain as part of their central nervous system. So the brain actually is attached to the nerve system, which is the spinal cord. Of the many ones that we're going to talk about, snakes are one. And the reptiles move in and out of the sun, and we find them oftentimes under rocks, in rock areas, anywhere that there might be absorption of heat. And one of the things that we see is snakes will oftentimes get into our bait stations. So anytime you're checking a bait station, especially if it's a black one that's been in the sun all day, kick it before you open it. You don't want to open it up and have a snake come out. The ones that live up in northern Nevada in our area or in Washington are pretty much harmless. It's going to be just the rattlesnakes that are poisonous. And a good way to keep snakes from your property is to make them not want to be there. So keeping the landscape minimal, making sure that you're protecting areas where there might be rocks or hiding places, anything like that, getting rid of rock piles and wood piles. All these are great recommendations to reduce the snakes. You can also use snake repellent, and that's a granular material that we put around the structure. And when the snake comes across it, they can sense it, smell it, and decide to stay away. Another one goes hand in hand with snakes are rabbits. And they're considered to be rodents. They're not necessarily what you would taxonomically, they would be considered rodents, but they're not necessarily something that you would think rodent and you picture a rabbit. They are cousins of the rats and squirrels, and they have two extra incisors. They're almost a 360-degree field of vision. They can see completely behind themselves, and they can produce their own heat. The rabbits re-ingest their own droppings rather than chewing the cud as cows and other herbivores do. So what they'll do basically is eat carrots, say, or some vegetation, and when they crap, they re-ingest that. And that allows them to be able to take in some more of the nutrients that might have passed through them the first time. Female rabbit usually is sexually mature at 3 to 8 months. They conceive any time of the year, and they produce about 60 young apiece. That's a lot of rabbits. when you see a rabbit burrow, it's generally going to be one or two entrances with multiple rabbits in that area. And that's how you're going to be able to differentiate them from other animals. The biggest thing is to try to go and see what kind of droppings there are. If they're small, round, grouped, chances are it's rabbits. Now, we've seen several times where we thought it was rabbits, and it was, but it was in turf that had already been messed up. And it wasn't the rabbits that were messing up the turf. It was the rabbits going to the turf that had already been messed up. And it was holding a lot of water, almost like a sponge where they could drink and then eat vegetation right nearby. So you have to watch for that to make sure that it's something that you can take care of. Easiest way to take care of them is going to be to find their home base or to build them out with hardware cloth. You can smoke them out. We do have the burrow smoker. There's no real bait that can be used for them. So the only alternative would be the live trap. And then, of course, pigeons. We do take care of pigeons. We don't kill them. We like to net or make sure that they can't get into an area where we want to protect. They can travel a long way, so you really can't catch them and take them somewhere and release them. You can tell there's different types of pigeons by just looking at them. They're related to doves, in fact, are considered to be rock doves. One thing about them, people often make fun of people having bird brains. Well, birds have, especially pigeons, a very a strong ability cognitively to recognize different types of art. So if they're trained with pellets to recognize say a French impressionistic painter, when you show them Dutch masters or something else, they wouldn't receive a pellet, but they can pick out the French impressionists. So they actually can determine and tell if a painting is a certain type, say certain type of art, or even by a specific artist. They can actually count. They can also pick textures. And they've been used as rescue beacons. So they've been taught to fly around when they see something. Let's say that people are lost in a forest. When they see the people, they know to fly in a circle so that the rescuers can find them. They're monogamous. So when a pair mate, they stay together for life. The eggs are laid and both parents stay around to take care of them. And their incubation as an egg lasts for about under 3 weeks. They'll eat nuts, seeds, berries, anything their beaks can be able to break and eat. They do like shelter. They do like water. So where you find them most often is going to be areas that they can be able to get coverage, find food, and be able to get something to drink. And then there are other ones. Larger vertebrates, raccoons, skunks. We do handle marmots, coyote, deer. Most of these we can take care of. Most often we'll run across raccoon or marmots. The others, although they're here, we don't see them nearly as often. What do we do for them? Basically live trap. And that's a whole separate part of our company, and how we take care of any of these is going to be dependent on what the circumstances are. This is where we're going to talk about the things that we're going to deal with most often. And that's the commensal rodents. That's the ones that you typically see around people. How you determine whether or not something is a house mouse or a small rat is merely by looking at the body, the feet, the tail, the eyes, the ears. If they look like they're disproportionately large, then we know it's a rat. The most common rat we deal with here is going to be the wood rat, and there's several different species. Typically, their one's going to be hiding up in attics, sometimes in crawl spaces. They'll have a few young at a time, and people refer to them most often as pack rats. House mice and deer mice are the ones that we're going to most often come across and have to deal with. Rodents are nocturnal. Self-defense for them is specifically being able to hide. They're often going to be feeding at night. If there is anything going on during the day where you see rats or mice running around, it's going to be because they either got kicked out of a nest or they're sick and they couldn't find anything to eat, so they came out during the day. Anytime they do this, they're at the mercy of predators, so they tend to stay hidden until it's nighttime and it's dark. Plus, they don't see very well at all. They have to rely on their senses to be able to distinguish where they're running to or where they're trying to hide and where their home is. So it's not going to be a good thing for them to be out during the day. They contaminate about 20% of the world's food supply. And it doesn't mean that they just crap all over it. If they actually have urinated or crapped on a bag that's in a pallet, that bag has to be tossed. So you can imagine if you only have a given amount of food and they're in 50-pound bags, if the rodents get in and they start defecating all over the place, it could ruin a lot of food that is much needed in many countries of the world. Some of the diseases that they can be able to transmit. There's 17 different viruses, including hantavirus. There's 9 rickettsial diseases, 20 bacteria, 3 protozoan, and the list goes on. So these are all things that they can easily be able to transmit, mostly in their urine and when they defecate. Food poisoning is probably the greatest threat. What happens is the mouse or the rat eats and then either craps or urinates somewhere on the food before it's prepared, or maybe out in the field, say a head of lettuce, and it doesn't get washed properly, gets sent through the line, and you end up buying it at the store. There's not a lot of studies done on this because you would literally have to have the rodent infected and then send them into a controlled environment outside and then try to see what you could be able to gather off various foodstuffs that they came in contact with. So it's all based on the idea that a group of people or individuals got sick. They went back and looked to see the area, found rats running everywhere, and then made an extrapolation to understand that that's where that probably came from. Some other diseases that are concerning are plague, leptospirosis, rat bite fever, arenavirus, lymphocytic chorial meningitis. There's all kinds of them that can be spread, and because they are mammals, it would not be difficult for them to be able to spread the diseases to us. First one we're going to talk about is the rats. As we said, wood rats are the most common ones that we run into. We don't really have Norways or roof, cotton, or kangaroo rats very often here. And the kangaroo rats have a tendency to stay out into the desert areas. They do give birth to live young. They can be commensal, and commensalism means that they can live with man. They are territorial. So with rats, you're going to have alphas and betas, and they'll stay in a specific area. And whenever they want to, or they get challenged, they'll kick the challengers out and let them go find their own area. They will eat just about anything they can find and can gather nutrients from just about anything. They are cartilaginous, which means that much of their body is cartilage with bone. So this allows them to squeeze into very tiny areas. Rats can fit into a hole about the size of a quarter. So as long as they can get their head through, they can squeeze in and they can be able to gain access. They gnaw continuously because their teeth continue to grow throughout their lifetime. And as we talked about, they are disease transmitters. Some interesting things about them. Rats can actually tread water for 72 hours. They're pretty good swimmers. They can swim a half mile. They could survive a fall from 5 stories and get up and run. They can climb up the side of a building. If they can find anything with like a downspout that has a 4-inch gap, they can use that to climb up inside of a building. Their teeth are so hard that they literally are just under diamonds in hardness. So I've seen lead pipe and cinder blocks that they've actually chewed through to get access into someplace. The second one of the rodents we'll talk about is the house mouse, the Mus musculus. And the mice, first thing right off the bat, they are not mini rats. So some of the things that will be talked about with rats may not necessarily follow with mice. Rats are what they call neophobic. So if something new is in their area, they're going to be afraid of it. Mice, on the other hand, are curious. So they're neotropic. With mice, you'll have a singular male that lives and has a harem of females. And if there's another male that's on the other side of the harem and not in the main area where this male is, he'll allow them to visit his harem, but he won't want to come in contact with them because then they'll fight. When they have young, as soon as the young are old enough, the males kick them out of the area and make them go find their own way. Mice are omnivorous. They just have certain things that they prefer. So they may want nuts or seeds or chocolates. We deal with a number of species, and some of them may be deer mice, might be the house mice, even voles we'll talk about later. And they are disease transmitters also, because as they take in certain diseases, they can spread them through the urine, saliva sometimes, and droppings. Mouse droppings, there's about 50 to 75 a day. So when you find somebody that says they have mice and you pull the drawer and there's droppings everywhere, it just may be it's one mouse, but they have the ability to defecate everywhere. Mice and rats don't have sphincter muscles. So as they run, they urinate and they also defecate. The mouse droppings are 1/8 to 1/4 inch long, and they're pointed on one end, not both ends. And if you do have them, then you know it's high activity. They can produce 3,000 urine micro droplets a day, which is a lot. And there's actually pictures in the internet of urine towers where mice have been sitting, and a number of mice have been living in a given area and urinating down onto, say, a crawl space, and the droplets just stacked on top of each other. Some of the other things that we might run into that could produce the same type of droppings might be American roaches or some of the larger roaches, because the droppings are pretty close to being the same size. Mice reproduce about 6 to 10 litters a year. Each one will have 5 to 6 young. It takes only about 3 weeks for the young to get out on their own. At 21 days, they're going to be running around. Within 6 to 10 weeks, they're mating. So 24 mice could collectively produce over 2,000 in 8 months. And if you carry that out, it could be 400,000 in a year. The family of mice will consist of 15 to 20 individuals, with females that are being bred by individual males, but the males themselves don't want to form any kind of relationship with other males. They want to get them out of there. So primarily it's going to be females, a main male, and then some of the young until they get older. They are thigmotactic. All rodents are thigmotactic, which means the hairs on their face and on their body, when they use them to touch something, it allows them to get a feel for where they need to be and how they can hide. So they'll always feel protected if they have 2 or 3 sides of their bodies touching. The mice, as we said, tend to be curious. They don't need a lot of water. They can get the water off of dew that's on different vegetation. They're very fast. They can run up to 12 feet per second. They can jump about 6-7 inches. The droppings, like we said, are pointed on one end. And if there's a crack that's over a 1/4 inch, they can get in. So anything the size of a dime or a crack 1/4 inch, it can give access to the mice. When they are overcrowded, they tend to run and leave and hide. They don't want to stay together. They don't try to produce a wall void full of mice. They want to go find their own and be independent. They do live outside during the summer. They don't hibernate. They'll be nesting in areas where it's warm. They don't want to run far to get something to eat. So anytime you've got a food source and you see that they've been eating it, look nearby, you'll find the holes or the areas that they've been living in. They don't need much water, as we said, and mostly they're active at night. We already spoke of hantavirus a bit. Deer mice, as you can see, are the only ones that typically will be a carrier. In certain parts of the country, other mice and rats can carry it too. Hantavirus is a group of viruses that happen to have mutated to where they can be produced by the mice in their droppings. And then when the droppings are swept up or crawled through, the dust that is collected will kick up. And as we breathe that in, that actually creates the environment for the virus to multiply. Some of the symptoms are mostly flu-like: fever, vomiting, chills, aches, sounds like just about anything, and it can be deadly. The rodents' teeth grow continually. 2% of their daily activity is spent doing nothing but chewing. Their teeth actually will grow at 0.5 millimeter per day. May not sound like a lot, but at the end of a month, you can imagine how long they could be. Their hardness is greater than iron, and they can put 7,000 PSI of biting pressure. So they can chew through things that we wouldn't think it were possible, gnawing on wood or cinder blocks. How are we going to manage this animal that reproduces so well, doesn't require a lot to eat or drink, and is basically superhuman, if you will, can jump, run, and hide in areas that we can't get to? Well, a big part of that is to follow our normal program, and that's inspection, gathering data, learning about what is there that the rodent likes, doing a treatment, and then finally educating the customer, because this is definitely a partnership where the two of us have to work together to get this resolved. So we'll inspect, look at the sanitation, see about doing rodent proofing, set out traps, and finally bait. Some of the rodenticides we work with are anticoagulants, and they're the 2nd generation. So the first one was warfarin, still used for stroke people to make sure that their blood doesn't clot. But with the new 2nd generation anticoagulants, they're faster acting. They don't have to eat multiple times to be able to get a lethal dose. And there's a number of them that are available. We use Mackey Block here, and they're worldwide. Everywhere people have used some type of rodenticide. They're relatively safe. Vitamin K is the antidote. It's found in most dog foods. So dogs are already taking a small dose. We just have to be very careful on where our placement of the baits are. The non-anticoagulants we work with: bromethylin, zinc phosphide we don't really use, cholecalciferol we use. So these are all items. We use a product by the name of Final, which is bromethylin. It's a single dose unless they chosen not to eat enough. And then when they come back, they can pick up a lethal dose. Once it gets in, it kills them quick. And is there a chance of bait shyness? Meaning if the rodent eats something, can the other rodents stay away? If that rodent dies, the other ones can smell what they ate on his breath. So typically all rodenticides will actually have a 2 to 3 day delay to give the rodent a chance to run around and do some other things so that the other rodents don't associate that death with that smell of the food. And there's no known antidotes for the non-anticoagulants. Some concerns, potential accidental or secondary poisoning. That's why it's so important to stake down bait stations if they're not going to be behind a fence or protected. We want to use tamper-resistant bait stations all the time. Make sure that the bait inside is secured. Make sure that we've checked it, that they can be retrievable. If we put out some bait, we can pick it up and collect it. We haven't just thrown it around like in a crawl space or an attic. Special care, any place where there might be companion animals that might get into stuff. Dogs have a tendency to find the rodent bait station, no matter where you put it. They look at it as a game. And so you have to be very careful to make sure that there's no way that any of the animals can get in. We have had a number of times in the past where bear have taken up our bait stations. And when they did, they've clawed them to try to open them up. And in some cases, we're able to retrieve the bait. Didn't hurt the bear, but if they didn't fully eat it, now there's open bait that's available to animals. So it's something we have to watch for and make sure that we're placing the bait stations in a good, correct place. So moving on from just your typical mice and rats, we go into voles. And they're small rodents that are like lemmings or hamsters. People call them meadow mice. They're relatively small, being 3 to 9 inches, not very bulky or big. The female can have 5 to 10 litters a year. And when they're only going to live 3 to 6 months, it means that that rodent is going to be breeding quick. Gestation lasts for about 3 weeks, and they reach maturity in about a month. So you could have huge growth and producing by just 2, about 100 in a year. They can thrive on small plants. They will eat dead animals. They'll eat just about any nut or fruit they can find. Typically, they'll also girdle plants because they'll eat some of the roots in the underground. They will eat bulbs. They'll eat shoots as plants are coming up. So they can be a true nuisance. Easiest way to take care of these is to be able to get baits in stations adjacent to where they're running around. If you can get bait into the holes that they're running in, then you can be able to treat that area. It's just one of those things that you can be able to utilize what you know about mice to treat the voles. Squirrels, on the other hand, like to dig holes, but they'll also live inside of rock areas, or this isn't the tree variety. These are the ground squirrels. So they're actually related to marmots and prairie dogs, but they're smaller. Not as small as chipmunks, which are also related to them. They'll eat just about anything, nuts, fruits, seeds. They're known to eat rats and mice sometime if they get into a fight, or the rodent, the rat or mouse is dead or in an illness, they'll attack and kill it. They like to be in open areas, fields, pastures, areas where they can hide. They will burrow and they will make a home in the side of rocky outcroppings, in the side of hills. Their body temperature of the 13-line ground squirrel drops to 98 degrees below or above the burrow temperature during the winter. So they can kind of hibernate, and their heart rate decreases from 2 to 350 beats per minute to about 5. So it goes to show you that they can go into a hibernation time also. California ground squirrels only produce a single litter, about 5 to 8 young. They can be as many as 15, and the young get out of the burrow and grow rapidly and take on their own families, if you will. Again, rodents will eat just about anything. So baiting them with the larger rat bait stations is a good method. Snap traps put inside of the bait stations work well. Any of those things will take care of the squirrels. You just have to make sure you've identified them correctly. Next one we'll talk about are gophers. We get a lot of confusion with gophers and moles. Gophers will tend to have a family, so to speak, where they're living in somebody's lawn and digging up holes. And the holes will have a kind of 45-degree angle to entrance into them. And that's where you'll find the dirt. And usually it's not around the entire hole, but it's just at one side or half of it. They live 1 to 3 years. The fur is basically brown. They have pouches on the side of their cheeks where they can be able to store food, or sometimes if they need to, they'll gather dirt when they're deep in the hole and take it outside and spit it out. They have small eyes, and they use their tail to actually feel around in the runways when they're underground so that they can be able to determine where they're supposed to go when they're backing up. They will eat mainly vegetation. The tunnels are specific for each gopher, but multiple gophers could be in one area. And they don't live in huge communities, but they will intermingle underneath the ground, and that's where they mate. And then other than that, they kind of keep to themselves. But you can just have a lot of them in one area because it's a preferred hiding area. We have a gopher bait that has to be applied into the hole, and it's a seed-based bait. So it's something that we would want to put in with a scoop or a pipe insulator that has a kind of a noodle that has a hole in the middle, and you can pour the bait down through the hole, and that will, if you run the insulation through the hole, you'll be able to get that deep into that area where they're running. Next one that we'll talk about are the moles. And moles are just like gophers. They like to dig. They don't have good eyesight. The main difference, though, is moles are much more solitary, and they will tunnel quite a great distance in a given day. Gophers tend to stay in their own area. Moles like to venture out to find food. Their favorite food is going to be earthworms, but they'll eat grubs and insects, especially anything underground. The only way to get rid of them is going to be with the burrow machine to actually get it in the ground and use it for treatment. Telperid, which is a worm, like gummy worm that's made with warfarin, that will kill them. They have about 1 to 2 young per year. And within a few months, those guys are now venturing off, and they're living off worms and grubs. The mole will eat about half their weight every day because they're doing nothing but tunneling, and that's pretty tough work. They're pests because they form these large areas where they've built up dirt, and you can see the dirt is from a 90-degree angle straight up, and it's pushed outward. The moles do help aerate the soil and bring nutrients, but they also are a nuisance that if you're on a riding lawnmower or walking, even a push mower can sometimes fall into some of their burrows. They usually are going to live February to May, and that's going to be their favorite time that they really start to breed. And then from there, the rest of the year until October, November, when it gets cold, they're continuously tunneling and looking for food. The gestation period's about 1.5 months. So once they mate, then they all go their separate way, and the female is left to raise the young and continue feeding them and growing the little group. And then if there's any questions, let us know, because we want to make sure that you understand our treatment with most of this is going to be exclusion. It's going to be baits. It's going to be steel wool. There's going to be, in many cases, a lot more work involved than what you would think just putting some bait down, putting a few boxes. Much more investigation needs to be done and determining specifically how the rodents might have gotten in. So thank you.